The Hinton Lecture honours the late Lord Hinton of Bankside, the first president of this academy. Lord Hinton was one of the 20th century's most eminent engineers, making enormous contributions both to the technology of energy generation and in later life to politics as an active member of the House of Lords. I'm really delighted that tonight, as our speaker, we have Dame Stephanie Shirley. She came to the UK in 1939 as an unaccompanied child refugee on the Kindertransport. She became a serial entrepreneur and founded an early software company that eventually employed over 8,000 staff. It started with just £6. And her female-friendly company broke new ground in its flexibility, its holistic approach to human resources, and in its co-ownership. Since she stepped down from her company, Dame Stephanie served on the boards of Tandem Computers in the US, the UK Atomic Energy Authority, and was the first ever non-executive director of the John Lewis Partnership. She's an ardent philanthropist, supporting IT and research into autism in particular. I'm really delighted to invite Dame Stephanie to give this year's Hinton Lecture, and after which there'll be a time for some questions. Please join me in welcoming Dame Stephanie.
Thank you, that's lovely. President, fellows, distinguished guests, good evening. Let me too start by honouring the late Christopher Hinton, after whom these lectures are named, the founding president of the Royal Academy of Engineering. Baron Hinton of Bankside became president also of the Institute of Mechanical Engineers, but he's best recognised for his work on energy. He was the founding chairman of the Central Electricity Generating Board and led the development of most of Britain's nuclear plants. And I've visited many of them, and they are enormously impressive. Did you know that the early 500 megawatt units were dubbed Hinton Heavies? And that's real glory for you. I'm also a founder of things, and I led my professional body, the Professional British Computer Society, as its first woman president. And I'm classed as a late pioneer. I'm in the computing museums of Bletchley Park and California. So you see before you a museum piece. The British Computer Society joining the Regulatory Engineering Council in 1981, that it was which qualified me to become a chartered engineer. His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh presented me with the Institute of Engineering and Technology's Mountbatten Medal in 1999, again the first woman. And earlier this year, Portsmouth University gave me an honorary doctorate in engineering. I do not accept that some disciplines are less or more feminine than others. The former Soviet republics, for example, have a high percentage of women in all the engineering subspecialities. But engineering's image, both in Western Europe and North America, is of masculinity. So I'm proud that our academy embraces diversity and has both a female CEO and a female president. In 2014, the Science Council nominated me as one of the top practicing scientists in the country. How does science differ from engineering? Some people say there is no difference. But scientists ask what things happen in the world and try to understand why it is as it is. And engineers use the answers to create new inventions and ideas. And the two disciplines go hand in hand. Scientists would be wasting their time if it went for engineering. There'd be no engineering without science. There's a massive overlap with applied scientists and very fundamental engineers. The word engineer comes from the same root as ingenious. To engineer something is to make something happen. Engineers are expected to be clever, original, and inventive. So why should they have such a poor image with young people? Engineering is exciting, creative, enormously rewarding. The relentless drive for innovation, the teamwork with scientists, with engineers, with management, the strategic timescales, not this month, this quarter, but working on developments to reach the marketplace in years or decades. And I'm passionate about making a difference, and engineering certainly makes a difference. The varied and variegated disciplines of engineering are the enablers which really allow us to a better quality of life. Its changes are exciting. Material taught in the first year of engineering degrees can be obsolete by the time the student qualifies. And one of the youngest disciplines is my own profession of software engineering, which has generated substantial wealth and changed the world. Defined by IBM, not me, as the process of analyzing, start that again. The process of analyzing user needs and designing, constructing, and testing end-user applications that will satisfy these needs by applying engineering principles to software development. And software engineering, I notice, still somewhat underrepresented in this academy. As the first woman to deliver the Hinton Lecture, I've been asked to address why I am a fellow of the Royal Academy of Engineering. As I've said, there's nothing but nothing gender-related about modern engineering. So I shall speak about those parts of my long career that have qualified me for fellowship. But beware, ladies and gentlemen, the older I get, the better I used to be. I left school with somewhat of a chip on my shoulder. As a girl, I'd had to fight to be taught mathematics. That was my passion, and changing schools twice in order to get tuition. Finishing up at a boys' school. The only science then thought respectable for girls was botany, the study of plants. That was okay for girls. I would dearly have loved to go to university, but I needed to start earning. So at 18, moved from rural Shropshire to London and got a job as a sort of mathematical clerk at the renowned post office research station at Dollis Hill, now Martlesham Heath. And for 8 years in that first job, I worked in a junior capacity on traffic studies, including 2 of the first 3 transatlantic telephone cables. and the first electronic telephone exchange at Highgate Woods, and on the special purpose computer Ernie. Premium bonds, but I never won anything. And all that was part of a group led by Tommy Flowers of Bletchley Park coding fame, and who designed the world's first programmable computer and was the very best of managers. I did a lot on waveguides, though never understood how my calculations related to the real thing. However, no matter. I met a handsome physicist on one of those projects, and ladies and gentlemen, I married him. Last week, when I said he's an angel, a woman complained. "You're lucky," she said. "My husband's still alive." The post office used to be responsible for telecommunications as well as mail, and I became an active member of a vociferous lobby group for the two to separate. And in the evenings, when I had a bit of time, I went to night school to get my academic qualifications. And at Birkbeck, perchance, found myself working on voice recognition systems, of which more hereafter. Never a dull moment. As an engineer, the post office gave me a little card authorizing me to climb up telegraph poles, typically 10 meters tall. Advised me always to have that card at the ready. There aren't as many telegraph poles as there used to be, but those remaining are all carefully recorded on a database, categorized, checked, and labeled as potential small cell sites for BT's open reach. They're highly valued. There's even a Telegraph Pole Appreciation Society. But I digress. The past is a foreign country. Mathematics was very much required when I fell in love with computers and moved to software engineering, logic design. Sometimes I worked pretty well on my own. Other times as part of a multidisciplinary team. I could not believe how much I earned by doing something that I enjoyed so much. Many people are defined by their work, and I am one such. Engineering really is at the heart of society, and it certainly opened the door of life for me. So let me tell you about my software house. In 1962, though we're not supposed really to remember the 60s, I founded a software company, not to make money, not because of the importance of software to people, to the GDP, to any measure you like to use, but as a crusade for women. And I recruited professionally qualified women who had, as was then the norm, left the computer industry on marriage or when their first child was expected, and structured them into a home-working organization, a 20th century cottage industry for women. And that crusade for women was the founding philosophy of the business. There weren't any women role models then. No one expected much from women in work because all expectations then were about home and family responsibilities. I couldn't accept that and started to challenge the conventions of the time, even to the extent of changing my name from Stephanie, that double feminine Stephanie Shirley, to Steve Shirley, so as to get through the door and be shaking hands before anyone realized that he was a she. My company, called Freelance Programmers, and that was exactly what it was, couldn't have started smaller, with about £100 in today's money and on our dining room table. I was the laughing stock of the industry, because at that time software was given away free with the hardware, so no one could sell software, least of all a woman. I never set out to make millions. My friends thought that I did not have the temperament to survive in the carnivorous environment of business. But I came to enjoy its freedom and intellectual challenge. What sort of software did my company do? An early project was to develop software standards, management control protocols. Software was and is a maddeningly hard to pin down activity. So that was enormously valuable. We used the standards ourselves. We even paid to update them over the years. And eventually those standards were adopted by NATO. And I gather some variant is still in use today. We disguise the domestic and part-time nature of the workforce by offering fixed prices, one of the first to do so for software. Who would have guessed that the programming of the black box flight recorder for supersonic Concorde was done by a bunch of women working in their own homes? That software took a series of analog readings from some 40 instruments, recording things such as height and acceleration, and organized them into what's called a best protected black box. And there's a separate box to safeguard the recording of the cockpit noises. I don't think the boxes are or ever were black. The only one I ever saw was bright yellow. And that important and valuable and exciting project is currently being researched by the BBC World Service. So I'm enormously proud of it, but what do I really remember about that project? Not the technology, nor its methodology, but the hassle I had in collecting the money for it. Sitting outside the chairman's office, and when people asked me what I was doing there, answering politely, I'm waiting to get paid. And eventually, he sent a message, and he should be nameless, tell Mrs. Shirley to come back tomorrow morning and her check will be ready, as indeed it was. I also managed to collect our fees from Rolls-Royce a few days before it went into administration in 1971. It was later nationalized. And the Rolls-Royce collapse taught people not to capitalize research as if its costs were investments. Research is slow. Research is expensive and can result in absolutely nothing. It's quite wrong to put it on the balance sheet. We developed a specialism in operational research, scheduling freight trains for British Rail, timetabling buses. Scientific stock control was just coming in, so we did lots and lots of stock control. Everything, it seemed, from massive cables, which came in enormous rolls, to ice cream, which came in little tubs and melted. Then there was a British Standards Institution project concerned with fluid flow in pipes, and some work for GCHQ and underwater weapons research, which I can't tell you about. Even on Guy Fawkes Night, the Official Secrets Act can't mention anything so explosive. We installed the first accident prevention computer system of speed signaling. I remember the team having to work from a porter cabin on the side of the M4 as it met the suspension bridge into Wales. The Metropolitan Police asked us if we could devise fingerprint software. I had to say that we couldn't. It took another 40 years to make that happen. We did work for the stock exchange at a time when women couldn't themselves work on the stock exchange or drive a bus. I couldn't even open the company's bank account without my husband's permission. My generation of women fought the battles for the right to work and the right for equal pay. When handsome young men used to offer to carry my equipment for me, I used to reply somewhat aggressively, "I believe in equal pay, so will carry my own things." Nowadays, of course, I say, "Oh, how kind. Thank you very much." As a patriot, and I love this country with a passion that perhaps only someone who has lost their human rights can feel, I've always accepted invitations to become involved in public matters, starting in 1967 on the steering group for the Milton Keynes Development Corporation, whom I advised on the network parts of its master plan. I served for 3 years, excuse me. I served for 3 years helping to direct government research in computer systems, where I had technical competence, and electronics, where my knowledge was scanty and dated back to valves. Remember valves? There's an alarming increase in the number of things I've forgotten about. Then they asked me to do another 3 years on electronics and avionics, about which I knew nothing. And that moved me to think more strategically. I also did 8 years on the board of the UK Atomic Energy Authority, including as it was privatized. Nuclear is an unforgiving technology. And although that position sounds very grand and very relevant to this Hinton Lecture, my contribution was mainly in human resources and introducing some much-needed commerciality. And as always, I acted as a role model for women. In 1982, the International Year of Disabled People, I spoke on communication aids and demonstrated in Parliament's upper waiting room a range of equipment, such as an early speech synthesizer and the Kurzweil text-to-voice reading machine for people who are blind. And today, as you can see, I'm demonstrating AI Media's voice-to-text, originally designed for people who are deaf, then for those with autism, and now a routine part of captioning for TV and other. Round about the same time, we put in the company's email, first email, 1982. And that used people's domestic televisions, which was not a popular thing to be doing to the stuff. But I like to do new things and make new things happen. And change is, for me, always an improvement on what went before. And thus, my company became a learning organization with a culture of innovation. You can always tell ambitious women by the shape of our heads. They're flat on top from being patted patronizingly. In 1975, 13 years from startup, equal opportunities legislation came in, which made pro-female policies illegal. And as an example of unintended consequences, my woman's company had to let the men in. And thereon, the company became well-balanced between the sexes, which is as it should be. And as organizations become virtual in this century, will gender perhaps become irrelevant? I ran the company at a little over break-even level until it was about 1,000 strong. And then professional managers came in and grew it and made it profitable. It eventually employed over 8,000 people and was valued at nearly $3 billion. Although it only declared its first dividend after 25 years, it is considered a success story and part of social history. People often ask me for the secrets of business success. One key is to surround yourself with people who are smarter than you are, and any of my colleagues can insist on confirming that I do that. Another is to choose your partners very carefully, any partners. The other day when I said my husband's an angel, a woman complained, "You're lucky, lucky, lucky." Every day brought fascinating problems, satisfying insights, and occasional innovations, ever new and more complex. There's never been such a rate of change, and the pace will never be as slow again. So our work was indeed never boring, full of interesting projects, varying from about 6-man weeks to the largest one in my time for BT, which was valued at $500 million over several years. We certainly developed some very clever software. But our main contribution to software engineering was managerial. To disguise the domestic nature of the workforce, we had moved to fixed prices. But it was risky stuff. So we broke our estimates down into what we called work parcels, none of which was greater than things we had successfully carried out previously. It was still commercially dangerous. So we started to do formal risk analysis as well. Simple stuff, but effective. What did I do with the serious money that I made in business? Some went back to the industry from which it stemmed. I'd been on the steering group which led to the information technologies delivery company, number 100 in the city's pecking order, nicely sounding binary, 100. And then on its founding court, and then its first woman master. So it seemed only natural for me to become its major patron, and I put in $5 million. There are still many, many opportunities to become the first woman this or that. The engineers' livery company only got its first woman master 2 years ago. Firsts are necessary. They need not be only. Another IT project costing over 10 million was the Oxford Internet Institute, OII, which again sounds nicely binary, which focuses not on the technology, but rather the social, economic, legal, and ethical issues of this network of networks. In 1999, I envisaged and directed a virtual conference which attracted 165,000 people worldwide. And I thought that was a first, but it turned out to be a third. Also in the same year, a very creative one for me, I initiated 31 projects that year, but I launched some very early virtual reality, elementary stuff compared to today's technology. But VR is something that really has a big future. Most of my giving, which totals 69 million to date, goes to projects that help autism, my late son's condition. And sometimes that's by donating much needed engineering items, such as the £1 million microscopy unit that I gave to Edinburgh's Patrick Wild Centre for Research into Autism, Fragile X, and Intellectual Disabilities. That was so big, it had to be levered in by crane. I've never seen such a big thing. Moving to the Royal Academy of Engineering. In 2001, past President Sir William Barlow, who knew me from my post office days, invited me to join this academy. And I was minded to decline because I'd become less of a software engineer and more than really just a manager of people. Then I learnt, despite the national need for engineering talent, that only 13 of the 1,000 or so fellows at the time were women. Make it 14, I said. The last time I checked, the number had increased to 85, 5.5% of the fellowship. Now, of this year's incoming fellows, 12% are women, rightly reflecting the 12% engineers in the workforce. It's good to see you, President, really strategically involved in improving diversity in all its forms. I mean, organizations say they want diversity, but they're not always willing to make the necessary changes to make cultural shifts to make it happen. I also applaud the Academy's leadership in the multi-year This Is Engineering campaign to reshape young people's perception of engineering in society. And to the active engagement of many of its fellows in planning a new engineering teaching university at Hereford to open in 2020 with a planned 50-50 gender mix in both faculty and students. Let me go back to my point about managing, making things happen, engineering things through other people. My company, having worked as a contractor on engineering for engineering giants such as Balfour Beatty or Stewart and Lloyd's, I cannot understand why in such quality organizations so few women get into top management. Tackling gender diversity is the easiest way to improve an organization's economic and cultural well-being. But it's multifaceted. All women also have an ethnicity, sexual orientation, social economic background, ability or disability, and maybe younger or older. We shouldn't be treated as an amorphous mass. Isn't it shameful that we still need a Women's Engineering Society and an annual International Women in Engineering Day? Back in the early 1980s, I helped establish Women in Science and Engineering to find out what motivates female engineers to enter and persist in the profession. And WISE co-founded with this academy the 10 Steps corporate program for women in STEM: science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Sometimes the M can stand for medicine, which leads me to the Hippocratic Oath, widely used by medics and adopted by many scientists. First in Canada and then in the US, engineers take what they call an oath of obligation. Shouldn't British engineers also have such an oath? Perhaps similar to the one used by graduating scientists. I promise to work for a better world where engineering is used for in socially responsible ways. I will not use my skills for any purpose intended to harm human beings or the environment, and will consider the ethical implications of my work before taking action. President, as a software engineer, I enjoyed many opportunities, made serious money, and had a wonderful life. Today, I am really proud to be a fellow of the Royal Academy of Engineering, and let me thank you most sincerely for inviting me. In this year of engineering, indeed at the start of tomorrow's Engineering Week, to deliver this flagship lecture. I honor the Academy's founding president, Christopher Hinton, and pay tribute to all that the Academy has achieved. Thank you very much.
Well, Dame Stephanie, thank you so much for that fascinating and very moving lecture. And can I say on behalf of the Academy that we are honoured to have you as a fellow, and thank you very much for giving this year's Hinton Lecture. Now, we're going to now move to slightly more comfortable seating. I don't know how you could manage that stool. It looks so uncomfortable to me.
I'm well padded.
And this is... I'm going to open the opportunity now to people here. I'm sure Dame Stephanie's speech will have aroused a number of questions that people would like to ask. If you do have a question, can I ask you to raise your hand, wait till the microphone gets to you, and when it does, start by saying who you are and your affiliation. Thank you. Any questions for Dame Stephanie? The one here?
Thank you so much for that. Maya Kolaska from BA Systems. One of the things we find from doing a lot of work on gender diversity is that actually there's still just a huge pipeline problem. And although companies are recognizing more and more that more needs to be done, actually in education, teachers and parents often are having a huge influence on our younger people before they even get to, looking at jobs at all. How do you think we can combat this more and actually start changing this at a much younger age?
Do you think we could start talking with teachers? Because you're quite right. The attitude towards science and engineering really starts very young. When I talk to girls of 9, 10, 11, they love science in all its manifestations. The same girls at 15, 16 somehow have switched off and find it too nerdy, too yes, no. They like more nuance in what they're doing, and we've lost them. because I don't think we're going to get them back if in their teens they've decided not. Does anyone else have any ideas? Do you know what's the magic thing?
The Academy does a lot with teachers, and one of the things that we feel we really help is by giving teachers the resources to bring the science that they may be teaching alive in engineering terms by showing youngsters how it can make a difference in the world. I think that inspires everybody. But really, I think your point is excellent, because if you work with the teachers, you work with, you have benefits year after year. And so our work with teachers is through a hub and spoke model, where we train some teachers, we give them kits to run activities, but it's on condition that they then bring in the schools around their own school. So you can really amplify the activities if you work with
You've used an engineering phrase, hub and spoke, and I haven't a clue what it means.
Oh, it's just a bicycle wheel, but if you get the thing in the middle right, the whole thing goes round.
Thank you.
I am a science teacher, and I find that I teach girls, and I find that if they want to do it and they keep it for an A-level, they continue. But they're extremely cautious in comparison to boys as how they approach what they do, whether they get it wrong, whether they can make a mistake. They're extremely nervous when they do experiments as to whether they're right or wrong, even though it doesn't matter. I mean, that's not the point of their GCSEs. And I find that, so this year we've got twice as many girls interested as we had last year, but I still feel as if they'll fall away. And I think it's to do with confidence of girls and fear of failing. And it's throughout the whole school curriculum. It's not just with science. They're nervous to carry on with maths. They're nervous to carry on with languages. I think it's a bigger problem in the idea of perfection that girls hold stronger than boys. Boys, they just get it wrong. They don't care. The girls are terrified of getting it wrong. So if you watch a class of boys and girls together, the boys are talking all the time. They're putting their hand up. They're telling you how great they are at everything. They're not as good, and the girls are very, very nervous to make a mistake. And it's throughout all of school that they're afraid of making a mistake. And there's something in that, in the girls, because actually they're good at it and they know they are. These girls that are going on, they're all getting terrific GCSEs, and they're afraid because they think it's hard. And there's some problem in their confidence, not really that they can't do it. They know they can. They're just afraid of being wrong. That's my experience at the moment.
A long time ago, I can remember my company actually did a study of schoolgirls. It was St. Paul's School, which is very upmarket. And what we found, we filmed science lessons, and we found that the staff actually, they were horrified when they saw this, were actually favouring the boys. They were asking the boys to act as demonstrators. They were, what's the word I want?
Encouraging them.
Really encouraging them. They were waiting longer for a response. And of course, there were these gender differences in body language. So the boys would really do this, and the girls would say, yeah. So teachers they were horrified to realize this was going on. There seemed to be some fairly simple rules about anonymizing answers in examinations and so on, but also in things like questions, taking alternate boys, girls, and so on, to make sure that that particular bias is not affecting you. So we all have a lot to do there to give young girls confidence. They give the impression, I don't know, I find them so smart, but they give the impression of having confidence. But whenever you get to know them, I realize that they don't. They're just as shy and scared.
But even in girls' schools, they're reluctant to answer a question. Even in a room of, children who won't judge them, they're very reluctant in case it's wrong.
Anybody else got some experience that underlines that, yes.
Well, yeah, and then...
Sorry.
You want to start?
Yeah, I'll go next. So I'm Harry Holt. I'm the Chief People Officer for Rolls-Royce, now back in private ownership. We've learnt our lesson about the balance sheet. You're absolutely right. A little bit before my time. So I have got a question, but actually just reflecting on the comments made there. I mean, so much of what was just said in terms of experiences in the classroom, I think is relevant actually in a company like Rolls-Royce, and I'm sure BAE Systems, where the perhaps perceived lack of confidence, the unwillingness maybe to offer a view first, quite often puts women on the back foot. And I think one of the challenges, certainly for us as a company, is how do we break our own stereotypical view of leadership so that it's not exclusively a male preserve, and we can recognize that all of those diverse skills and attributes that female managers can bring to bear, are appropriately recognized and rewarded. So I was just sort of reflecting on those observations in the classroom being, relevant 20 or 30 years later
on.
in the management. And I think one of the responses, certainly that we're trying to drive, is to actually change the way that we lead, and so that leaders at all levels are much more conscious of these, the diversity of their own teams, and are leading in a way that encourages those people that don't naturally come forward and offer a view, and not to be afraid of failure. But my question, sorry, if I can move to a question, is really around quotas and targets. So, like all big companies, we've got some targets for diversity, not just for gender, but for other aspects of diversity. And I'd just be interested in your view as to how you can have a target, but without it becoming a quota. Let's put it that way.
I can remember when the first discussion of quotas came up, and I was avidly against it. I think it was absolutely disgusting to have a quota for that. But as the decades have gone on, I begin to sort of think, well, something like that is going to be necessary to move women on faster. What gets, the standard thing is what we measure will be managed. And by keeping assessments taking into account the diversity of different teams makes people conscious of the need to increase their innovation by having more diverse teams. As always, I think culture starts from the top, right at the top. I'm currently working with a major IT company, and they're doing lots and lots of wonderful things right. But the top is sexist. I can see it, and that has to be addressed. So all culture starts from the top, and you, sir, and others at your level really have to support women, so that it's not just women supporting women, but actually men supporting women.
Do you still have a question? Or?
Hi, I'm Chloe de Tandra. I work at Mott MacDonald. This was more a continuation of the two previous things. And I think the first question touched on it. It wasn't just the teachers, but I think it also comes down to the parents. The reason why girls maybe don't have the right kind of confidence. And I think, I hate to bring religion into this, but I do think that that part of the culture is a big player. I was brought up by a very, well, I'm not Catholic, but my parents were brought up in a very Catholic way, and the whole sort of the boy and the girls, the way they're treated is quite fundamentally, well, almost sexist in parts. And one example I had was I was talking to a senior director at my company who's a middle-aged British white male. And he was talking about how he found it amazing that there were 2 or 3 people, including myself, who were all girls, sort of graduates coming sort of up into the business world of, you know, understanding engineering and how the business kind of develops. And he was saying how great it is and really pushing the STEM thing. And then 10 minutes later, we started talking about sort of what he was going to do over, I think it was the Easter holidays. He said, oh, I'm actually going to go skiing with my daughter. She's 12. I'm a bit nervous because we've never done this. I was like, oh, why haven't you done this? He's like, well, I mean, she's a girl. She obviously doesn't like sports.
Yeah, yeah.
And I said to him, but I mean, have you asked her if she likes sports? And he was like, well, yeah, and that's why we decided to go skiing. But I just always assumed that she would she'd hurt herself or whatever. So he was in the workplace defending, you know, graduate female engineers and respecting the fact that they were good. But at home, didn't see the irony behind him not seeing that his daughter needed to be given that chance as well. So I think it's all up to us. And I mean, it's not just the dads, it's also the mums. My mum she loves me being an engineer because she can sell that to her friends. But the thought of me being on site wearing big boots and high-vis and PPE is just not a very feminine thing. So she's kind of like, are you sure you want to be going on site? You know, so I think we need to, well, the next generation, well, I don't have kids, but when I do have kids, I'll try to make sure to bring them up in a more kind of gender-neutral way and give equal opportunities to boys and to my son and my daughters if I have them. And I think that that's something that we should all become conscious of, because we might do it unconsciously, you know.
It is this business of being patronized. I mean, a lot of things, sexism that goes on is actually quite well-intentioned. I came across it for some time. I was working like mad, commissioning a computer system, and I was working nights, and I was told it was illegal to work, for women to work nights. And I said, I don't believe it, and checked it up, and indeed it was, and we got it changed. But I mean, it's that sort of thing. You have to fight every single bit of the way.
Thank you. A question here?
Not really a question, just a comment to add to this previous theme around girls and education. As a girl doing, in the last century, quite a while ago, doing physics and maths A-levels, I remember being sat in a room by someone saying, you have to do engineering because of your A-levels. But no one sold me the vision. It wasn't a confidence issue. It was about the vision for what I could do with the engineering and the different types of engineering. Now, my great-great-aunt was an engineer. It wasn't that. It wasn't a done thing for women. It was about not being given the vision for what I could do with a degree. Oh, I'm now doing a doctorate. I'm being supervised by a fantastic female engineer.
There you go.
And that's what the This Is Engineering campaign is trying to, through role models who are young women men and women who are engineers, but actually showing the breadth of engineering and the good that it does. So the theme is whatever you're passionate about, whatever your interests, you can follow those into engineering. But it's by emphasizing the benefits it brings and what it actually achieves.
Hi, I'm going to go slightly off the female topic for a second, but I'm Sam Barrell. I'm a medical doctor by background. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at the Francis Crick Institute. I just wanted to ask you, Dame Shirley, about your business when you set it up originally. You said that your whole raison d'etre for your business was about giving women an opportunity to work.
I'm a crusader.
A crusader. And I've always thought to make a business successful, you've got to have a passion about what the business is about. And that's most sort of successful people seem to have that as a central core to their business. It's something they really feel passionate about. And I suppose what struck me when you said that about giving women a role to work, how did you then connect that to the core other purpose of your business? Was there passion for that as well? Or could you have had women doing anything in any industry? How did you make it successful if you just focus on the women aspect, how do you make it successful from the point of view of the core business being successful?
I suppose I treated it just as a sort of hygiene factor. We had to keep cash flow positive, otherwise we'd be finished. We had to keep some sort of profitability going, otherwise nobody would come and work for us. We had to keep our marketing there, otherwise we wouldn't get the business, and there'd be no company. So it was very much, to me, a hygiene factor.
So if you are to do that, then how do you make the business successful? Because if something's just a hygiene factor, often it isn't successful as a business.
Ah, mine was.
But when you talked, it didn't sound like that, because you talked about the projects that you'd done, and clearly the benefits that those projects brought. You must say you sounded very enthusiastic about that as well.
I think it's the excitement that all science and engineering can give you. What are you doing? What's the benefit of this? Why are we doing it? Are we doing it just to get a pay packet at the end of the month? Well, some people are. But to me, work is not just something I do when I'd rather be doing something else. I really want to make something happen. I really want to get this organization as a model for how women can work in teams. Of the first 300 staff, 297 were women. EY is currently doing a study as to what happened to our gender profile over the years. Did it drop? Because it did drop. As we made acquisitions, which were obviously much more traditional companies, what in the long term, it had a 45-year life, what really made it succeed? And there were a lot of different issues.
Can we take a question there? With the man with glasses? Oh, sorry. There's so many.
Edmund Booth, I'm a freelance structural engineer.
Not the right one.
Did you ever turn down a really interesting, lucrative project because you didn't believe in the outcome of it, on moral or ethical grounds?
We were first in actually making a charter of actually saying things such as ethics and as well as productivity. We certainly turned down work when I didn't like the people. I just looked at the guy and said, I don't want to put anything. We also had ethical issues. There was one I always quote was large government contract. We were bidding for it, and we bid together with IBM. And the department came back and sort of said they liked our bid and so on, but would we now bid with ICL, then the British computer manufacturer? And we said no, all the preparation we'd done with IBM, and we were going to stick with them. It was hard to turn down that major task. The ICL consortium did actually get the work, and that was fine. But as always with ethics, in the long run, it comes right. IBM was so impressed by our ethical behavior that they went out of their way to partner us with some major government contracts in the future. So yes, I think ethics is very important. One of the things with the Oxford Internet Institute is its focus on ethics, and at the moment on false news and so on. It's a difficult time for all of us to know. And I wonder how you react to the idea of an oath that I mentioned, which very clearly talked about, I will consider the ethical issues of my work before I start it.
Yeah, it resonates very strongly, and ethics is just so important.
Yeah.
Of course, it's something the Academy has been working with the Engineering Council on, and I think this time is so important right now. You say some of the things that have happened. So the man that I missed with earlier, who had the microphone in his hand, it's your turn. You have
Several people have got glasses.
Yes.
Thank you very much. My name's Arno Doko. I would like to hear your thoughts on software. the titans of Silicon Valley tell us software is eating the world. They also tell us that there's been a lot of progress in the world of bits, not nearly as much progress in the world of atoms. And we are seeing a world where, driven mainly by information technology, the economy is changing very quickly. My own background is in mechanical engineering. There are many other branches of engineering that are not nearly as connected to information technology, connected to software. And it seems like we're getting some sort of runaway effect where the progress seems to be very much in software, but how can other parts of engineering latch on and we can get a more generalized progress at the same kind of rates as we are getting in software?
I think I have a big I don't know on that one. Software is moving very fast. The artificial intelligence world, which is, and I mentioned virtual reality as well, that ties up very clearly with the old style mechanical engineering or the other engineering subspecialities. I don't think anyone can hope to equal the pace of change in software at the moment. So it's, you've got to get in there, you've got to work with the IT people, because that is the way the world seems to be going.
I'll just take one more question here, in front of you.
Oh, Keith Clark. I'm a volunteering interviewer for the IET for Chartered Engineer, and I was extremely interested in your views on an oath of obligation. But the wording you put up there, would not do harm, would appear to preclude chartered engineers working in either the defence industry or the armed services. So I just wondered what your views on that are.
Luckily, I don't have to make those decisions anymore, but we had quite a few staff who very clearly did not want to work on defence projects, and we respected that. I think that was, there's no point in pushing them onto projects that they're not interested in. Because when you're working on software, it's usually, it's a long time scale. It is extremely debilitating. You never seem to be getting this right. And, if you don't believe in what it is that you're trying to do, there's no point in doing it. So I think people want to keep out of the defense area. It's rather like me saying to my banking people, I don't want you to invest in cigarettes. I smoke.
Well, I'm afraid that's all we've got time for. I know there are lots of people dying to ask questions, but I'm afraid we do have to at least wrap up here now. I'd like to thank everyone for being so engaged with the questions, but particularly I'd like to thank Dame Stephanie for giving us a really fascinating evening and an insight both into your past, and parts of it really seem like a different world, and then you bring us right up to date as well. So thank you very much for a great evening.
We're going downstairs now.
I'd like to invite everybody now to join us for drinks downstairs. Downstairs there is a display of copies of Dame Stephanie's memoir, which she would be willing to sign. As you may have seen earlier on, there's a display of it. It's called, is it Let IT Go or Let It Go?
Well, you've seen the pun there, yes.
But the really good news is that you will have an opportunity to acquire a copy and have it signed for just a small donation to the charity Acoustica. Autistica. So I hope everyone will take the opportunity for that. But thank you very much, Dame Shirley. And thank you all very much.